Everything changed the second I stood up and said what I said. The music was still playing when I got out of my seat. People were still chewing Horvaz, still mid-laugh, but by the time I crossed the room, past a table of her coworkers, past the guy she swore was just a friend, past the woman who whispered, "Is he serious?" I wasn't even hearing any of it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even thinking. I was done. 3 minutes earlier, she had made me the punchline of the party. We were at her boss's engagement dinner. It was formal, seated, white tablecloths, the kind of place where they put rosemary on everything. I had spent the last hour politely smiling, nodding at conversations I wasn't part of, listening to stories about fashion brands and startup apps I couldn't care less about. Then during the toasts, they handed her the microphone and she lit me on fire. She started with something harmless. "Graham has been my rock during this chaotic planning," she said. I smiled. That was sweet. But then came the smirk. I mean, sometimes I forget he's there. He's like a supportive little ghost, always floating around the edges. Laughter. A few polite chuckles. Then she added, "And I just have to say it. Every girl needs a Graham." Quiet. Predictable. Basically like a human houseplant. More laughter. I felt my face get hot. Someone at our table turned and actually patted my shoulder like I was a wounded animal. That's when the wine glass slipped from my hand. I wasn't even holding it tightly. My fingers just gave up. It bounced. I stood up, and for the first time in 2 years of being overlooked, brushed off, and turned into someone else's prop, I found my voice. I walked right to the front, took the mic from her hand, and said, "Funny thing about houseplants. When you forget to water them, they die." Engagement's off. You could hear a pin drop. She froze. Her boss stared. Someone coughed. Someone else dropped a fork. I didn't wait for her reaction. I walked out, leaving behind my jacket, my pride, and the version of me that stayed silent for too long. But I didn't go home. And that's where this story really begins. The cold hit me the moment the elevator doors closed. Not just the kind that comes with walking out of a heated party into the night, but the kind that settles into your bones when you realize she never respected me to begin with. I stood there in that glass box, staring at my reflection. My shirt was wrinkled, my tie slightly crooked, and my eyes, I barely recognized them. I didn't look brave. I didn't look like a man who just ended his engagement with a perfect one-liner in front of 50 guests. I looked like someone who had just been emotionally bulldozed and was only now crawling out from underneath the wreckage. But what I didn't know was that I had left too early. The real confession came after I walked out. I only went back inside because I forgot my keys. They were in my blazer, which was still on the back of her chair. I considered texting her to bring them out, but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. I figured I'd slip back in quietly, grab the jacket, and vanish again before anyone could process what had just happened. But when the elevator opened, the music had stopped. The speeches were over. People were milling about in small groups, whispering like someone had died. I spotted my jacket right away. It was still there, draped across the seat, abandoned like I had been. I moved quickly and quietly, keeping my head down. That's when I heard her voice. She was standing just on the other side of the curtain partition, probably assuming I was long gone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I froze only because I heard my name. I mean, I was going to break it off anyway, she said, sounding way too casual. I just didn't expect him to do it first, and definitely not like that. Someone laughed. A man. I recognized the voice. Her coworker, Drew. The one she always insisted was just a buddy. He really set engagements off in front of everyone? Drew asked, clearly entertained. She laughed too. I know it was kind of dramatic, but honestly, save me the trouble. I just wish he'd done it before I bought the dress. That last sentence punched me harder than her toast had. Bought the dress. She was planning our wedding while simultaneously planning to leave me. I stood there still as stone, heart pounding, wondering how long this had been going on. Were there others before Drew? Or was he the reason she started treating me like an accessory instead of a partner? I should have walked away right then. I should have taken my jacket and disappeared for good. But something snapped in me. Not anger, not revenge. Just this overwhelming, almost pathetic need for the truth, for answers, for closure. So instead of leaving, I took out my phone and hit record. If she wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, like I was just some safe choice she could toss aside at a cocktail party, then maybe she deserved to hear what she sounded like without the performance mask on. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what else she said. I should have turned around and left the second I got my jacket. That would have been the strong thing to do. Disappear, rebuild, move on. But instead, I stood behind that curtain, breathing shallow, listening like some rejected ghost hovering outside his own life. My phone trembled in my hand, still recording. I didn't know what I was hoping to hear. Maybe a flicker of guilt, a sliver of regret, something to prove she still cared, that I wasn't just a name to scratch off a list. But what came out of her mouth next buried me. I didn't even like him when we started dating, Tessa said, swirling the wine in her glass. It was just supposed to be temporary. He was so desperate, kind of cute in a pathetic way. I felt sorry for him. My breath caught. My knees actually buckled. I gripped the back of the chair for balance. Drew let out a low chuckle. So what changed? Why the engagement? She shrugged. My lease was ending. He had a nice apartment, stable job, no drama. I figured why not? It's not like I had anyone better lined up at the time. And he adored me. I could have told him I was abducted by aliens and he'd believe it. He laughed harder at that. She didn't stop. It's funny, she went on, her tone so casual, like she was talking about a boring lunch. I used to call him my emotional support fiancé, like one of those therapy dogs. But with taxes, they both cracked up, she added. And the weird part? He actually looked proud when I called him my rock. Like he didn't realize I meant it in the boring wall with no feelings kind of way. I should have stopped listening, but I didn't because I couldn't. Every word felt like a needle shoved under my skin. Then Drew lowered his voice and asked, So, if he hadn't made that dramatic exit, would you have still gone through with it? There was a pause. Then she said, Honestly, I was thinking of cheating on him the week before the wedding just so I'd have a reason. Something he'd find that would blow it up and take the guilt off me. I even considered planting texts from a fake number. That was it. That was the moment the floor disappeared. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship, the nights we stayed in and binged-watched dumb shows, the quiet breakfasts, the random forehead kisses, they all turned into background noise for a script she was faking the entire time. I ended the recording and stuffed the phone into my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I didn't know whether to cry or scream or throw up, but instead I quietly walked out the side exit and into the night. This time for good. I didn't go home. I just started walking. No destination, no direction. Just the kind of walking that feels like the only thing keeping your heart from splitting in two. But as I crossed a dark intersection lit only by flickering street lamps and the sound of traffic in the distance, I realized something that chilled me even more than her words. She didn't accidentally hurt me at that party. She wanted an audience. She wanted witnesses. And maybe, just maybe, this was all a setup from the very start. I walked for what felt like hours. I didn't check my phone. I didn't call anyone. I ignored the buzzing notifications, probably from guests at the party, or maybe Tessa herself trying to control the narrative. I didn't care. My mind was stuck in that awful loop of her voice. It was supposed to be temporary. I felt like a placeholder in my own life, a convenience, an emotional punching bag dressed in formal wear. By the time I reached my apartment building, the night had thickened into a quiet that almost felt sacred. It was close to 2 a.m. and the city had gone to sleep without me. I expected silence, darkness, solitude. I just wanted to grab my things and start packing. No drama, no tears, just get out and never look back. But the second I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. The lights were on. The scent of her perfume still hung in the air. Sweet, expensive, artificial, like everything else about her. I walked inside slowly, scanning the room. That's when I saw it. On the kitchen table sat a single manila envelope. My name was written on the front in her handwriting, sharp and perfectly even, like she'd practiced it. I hesitated before picking it up. My gut already knew this wasn't some apology letter. Inside were 2 things: a printed itinerary for a 2-week trip to Costa Rica, first-class flights, beachfront resort, full spa package, departure date, next Friday. And the kicker? A receipt, paid in full, under the names Tessa Calloway and Drew Whitmer. I stood there for a moment, barely breathing. Then I flipped the page. There was a note scribbled in the corner. I didn't think you'd take it so personally. At least now you have a week to move out. I'll send someone for my things. That was it. Not I'm sorry. Not let's talk. Just a reminder that she expected me to be the one to disappear quietly. Neatly, like some piece of old furniture she'd ordered someone to pick up. She left it there because she thought I'd already be gone. She thought she'd hurt me just enough to walk away proud of herself, like she was finally free of the clingy accountant who once made her laugh over spilled coffee. But here's the part she didn't count on. I had the recording. I had her words, her smug little confession, all captured in perfect clarity. And as I stood in my own kitchen, staring at a luxury vacation she was taking with the man she swore was just a friend, something inside me finally stopped breaking. It hardened. I wasn't the type of person to burn bridges, but that night, I realized the bridge was never real. It was a cardboard cutout she used for show, and the whole thing had been set to collapse from the beginning. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want closure anymore, but I wasn't going to walk away empty-handed either. And that's when I decided if she wanted to play games, I'd give her one she'd never forget. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the edge of my bed, still dressed in my suit, shoes untied, the envelope opened beside me like some twisted goodbye letter from a woman who never meant a single word she'd whispered at night. I kept replaying the recording, her voice laughing, belittling me, using my loyalty as a punchline. I couldn't stop listening, not because I wanted to hurt myself, but because I needed to remember exactly who I was dealing with. I'd spent years seeing her through soft lighting, romanticizing her charm, her confidence, her ambition. But now, the spotlight was harsh, and it revealed something else entirely. Manipulation. Calculated cruelty. A woman who didn't just fall out of love, she weaponized it. Around 6 a.m., as the sun started bleeding through the blinds, I finally moved. I got up, showered, put on a clean shirt, and made coffee like it was any normal morning because I knew something she didn't. She thought I'd vanish. She thought she'd walk into that resort with Drew, sip piña coladas, and post filtered selfies while I disappeared quietly. But she didn't know I had leverage. She didn't know I had her voice admitting it all. So I sent a message. Just one. No threats, no insults. Just facts. Hey, Tessa. Before you board that flight, you should probably listen to this audio file attached. Then I turned off my phone. What happened next? I had to hear from someone else. Apparently, they got to the airport early. She was wearing a sun hat and holding hands with Drew. TSA went fine, but halfway through waiting at the gate, she checked her phone and everything changed. A friend of hers texted me later, said she turned pale, like someone had drained every drop of blood from her body. She pulled Drew aside, practically dragging him toward the windows, phone in her hand. Witnesses said she kept repeating, "He recorded it. Oh my God, he recorded it." Drew got loud. He was pacing. She was crying now. Not soft, remorseful tears, but furious, panicked ones. And then they didn't board. That expensive trip she planned with the man she was willing to throw me away for, canceled. And that was just the beginning. By the time I turned my phone back on that evening, there were 12 missed calls from her. 5 from an unknown number and 3 voicemails that started with "Graham, please," and ended in tears. I didn't listen to them. I didn't need to. I knew the sound of her voice already, and I had it backed up in multiple places just in case. But the real kicker, that same evening, I received an email from her boss. Subject line, "Need to discuss something urgent." Apparently, someone had forwarded the recording to the company. I hadn't, not yet. But someone who had been at the party, someone who heard her speech and witnessed what I did, had a conscience, and they had access to her work contacts. Suddenly, Tessa wasn't just a fiancée who lost control of a situation. She was an employee under internal investigation, and I wasn't done yet. The voicemail transcription sat unread. Her voice had become white noise, a meaningless hum with fake concern and shaky guilt. She only cared now because she'd been exposed, not because she'd hurt me. I could see the difference clearly, and that clarity felt cold, but also necessary. I wasn't the same person who stood smiling beside her at that party. That version of me had been dismantled piece by the woman who claimed to love me. That night I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by little reminders of her. A scarf still on the chair, a bottle of shampoo in the bathroom, coffee mug she insisted we buy as a couple thing. All of it felt radioactive. I wanted it gone, but not dumped into garbage bags. No, it had to be methodical. I needed space to breathe, and that meant removing her from every corner of my life. That's when I remembered the storage unit. A year ago, when we were rearranging furniture and pretending we were nesting, we rented a small unit across town, mostly to store things she couldn't part with. Art supplies from her college days, her old apartment's decor, stuff she swore she'd use again. I hadn't thought about that unit in months, but as I opened the drawer where I had kept the keys, the cold realization hit me. If there were any real secrets she hadn't intended for me to find, they'd be there. The next morning I drove over. The place was nearly empty, tucked between a car wash and a dusty bakery. I passed rows of metal doors until I found ours. Unit number 204. The lock was still in place. I slid the key in, turned it, and pulled up the door. At first, it was exactly what I expected. Boxes, an old chair, a standing mirror wrapped in a blanket. But then on the top shelf, I saw a box labeled Archive. Not her handwriting. It was neater, smaller. Something about it felt deliberate, hidden in plain sight. I climbed up, pulled it down, and opened it on the floor. Inside were folders, dozens of them, some labeled with dates, others with names. At first, I didn't understand. Then I opened one. It was a dossier. That's the only word for it. Full background info on a man named Patrick. Old texts, screenshots, even his Instagram DMs printed and highlighted. The messages were flirtatious, suggestive, from her. Then another folder. Someone named Louise. Same thing.
Dozens of messages, some romantic, some manipulative. Notes in the margins. Good job. Stable. No kids. Possibility. I went numb. She had been collecting men, not in the playful dating sense, in the predatory sense, categorizing them, mapping out what they could offer her. I found my own name, Graham. My folder was thicker. She'd been tracking my behavior, my mood swings, my finances. There were notes like, reliable, predictable, lonely, and won't leave even if pushed. I felt sick. All this time I thought I was the one holding on to her. But the truth was, she had been studying me, prepping for every manipulation like it was a business deal. I wasn't her partner. I was an asset, a temporary investment until a better offer came along. But then something else caught my eye. A sealed envelope addressed not to me but to Drew, and inside it, a letter, a goodbye letter. She had written it weeks ago. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. My name wasn't on it. Drew's was written in her usual sharp pen strokes. It felt like a boundary I wasn't meant to cross, but the entire last week of my life had been one long trespass through lies I didn't know I was living. So I opened it, and as I unfolded the letter, I braced for another knife in the ribs. I expected love declarations, fantasies of escaping together, maybe instructions for how they'd live once I was out of the picture. But that's not what I found. Instead, it started with a confession. Drew, you're probably angry reading this, maybe confused. But I need you to understand, I was never supposed to fall for you. This wasn't the plan. She went on to say that their affair started out of boredom, not passion, not love. She had met Drew at a work retreat, and the flirtation had spiraled because she wanted to test the limits of how far she could go before something snapped. It was never about him, or about me. It was about control. She wanted to know how much she could get away with, how far she could push until someone pushed back. Graham never noticed. He gave, and I started to resent him for it. You? You saw through me a little. You pushed back. It made me feel something for a while. Then came the real twist. But the closer we got, the more I realized I wasn't safe with you either. You wanted things. You started to ask too many questions. You wanted more than I was ready to give. So I decided to cut it off. Not now. Soon. Costa Rica was going to be the end, not a beginning. She wasn't running away with Drew. She was planning to use the trip to end things. She wrote that she had already been looking at a new apartment, a solo lease. She even admitted she thought he might not take it well. If you lash out, I'm sorry, but I won't be anyone's property. Not Graham's, not yours. I sat there on the dusty floor of the storage unit, letter shaking in my hands, stunned. All this time, I thought she had replaced me, upgraded, left me in the dust for someone more exciting. But the truth was, she was never running to Drew. She was running from everyone. She burned bridges before they could collapse under her own emotional weight. She didn't want a partner. She wanted escape routes. Suddenly I realized how dangerous this really was. Not in the physical sense, but in the emotional wreckage she left behind. It wasn't just me she'd broken, it was anyone who dared to believe her. And as I sat there surrounded by files of men she had studied and discarded, I realized something. I hadn't let myself feel until now.
I wasn't special in how she used me, but I was going to be different in how I responded. No more messages, no more revenge. I wasn't going to play into her pattern. I was going to finish this with something she never expected. Calm, calculated removal. Because now I had everything I needed, and she was about to find out what silence feels like when she's on the receiving end. I left the storage unit without taking anything but that letter, the folders, the twisted paper trail of emotional damage. I left it all behind like ashes from a fire I didn't start. I wasn't going to spend one more second organizing her mess. I wasn't her cleanup crew. I wasn't her quiet exit. I was done being the man she used for stability while chasing chaos behind my back. The next morning, I boxed up the rest of her things from the apartment and had them sent to her office. Not out of pettiness, but clarity. No passive-aggressive notes, no post-it messages stuffed in bags, just her belongings and a copy of the lease transfer form. She had exactly 30 days to sign it or deal with management. I didn't owe her softness anymore. By that afternoon, I was sitting in a quiet little coffee shop downtown, one she never liked because it was too boring. I ordered the same black coffee I always got, cracked open a new journal, and stared at the blank page. It didn't feel like starting over. It felt like waking up. In the days that followed, Tessa kept trying. She texted, she called, she emailed. At first it was guilt, then justification, then somehow blame. I didn't respond to any of it because for the first time her words had no weight. She could only pull strings if I let her, and I wasn't a puppet anymore. The audio recording, I deleted it. I didn't need it. It served its purpose, not to humiliate her but to wake me up. I didn't want to be the guy who clung to evidence. I wanted to be the guy who chose peace over power. 1 month later, I signed a lease on a new place. Smaller, quieter, just mine. The night I moved in, I poured a glass of wine, stood at the window, and for the first time in what felt like years, I breathed without a knot in my chest. Not because I won, not because I ruined her, but because I stopped begging to matter to someone who never deserved me. She made me the punchline at a party, but I became the author of my own ending.